Ever feel like you're talking, but maybe nobody's really listening?
Oh, definitely. Like your words just vanish into thin air sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. We talk all day, every day, but how often do we think about the psychology behind making those words actually land?
That's precisely what we're getting into today. We're doing a deep dive into the thinking of Suin. He's a psychologist, also a training manager, loads of
Over
experience.
10 years, right. And something like 400 certifications.
Yeah, quite the background. He's got this material on the psychology of communication out there on the Emo Matrix channel. And it's really practical stuff.
Science-backed, too, which I like.
Exactly. So our mission today is basically to pull out the core ideas from Suin's approach. We want to give you a clear picture of what makes communication actually work.
And crucially, how you can make your own conversations, your own interactions just more effective, more impactful.
Spot on. We're not just scratching the surface. We're aiming to understand the fundamental psychological principles Sun lays out.
Right, give you that edge in daily life.
Mm.
Okay, so let's jump in. Soon starts with, I think he calls them the 3 psychological aspects of communication. First one is discover.
Yes, discover. And Sun really hammers this point home. It's the critical first step. Before you even worry about what to say.
You need to figure out who you're talking to.
Exactly. Who's the audience? And what's the situation? The context. He argues that if you skip this discovery phase, well, your message might just go nowhere.
It won't have the impact you want. It's like trying to give directions without knowing the starting point.
Good analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Discovering means really getting a handle on your audience. What do they already know? What are their viewpoints? Maybe even their potential, hang-ups.
And the situation matters just as much. Like, is it a big formal presentation or just a quick chat? Maybe a really tense negotiation.
Totally different approach is needed. Right. Soon points out how context shapes absolutely everything. Your tone,
Your word choice.
your delivery style, even maybe the kind of persona you put forward slightly, like explaining something complex to your own team versus explaining it to a brand new client.
Completely different ballgame.
Right. And Sun uses his own video as an example. He's talking to this wide, sort of unknown audience.
Which is pretty general.
But he contrasts that with targeted communication. The more you pin down who you're talking to in the specific
The
situation.
better your chances of success.
Yep.
And he has this great line. He thinks, getting that discovery part right puts you halfway through to influence and impact people.
Wow, halfway. That really shows how much weight he puts on that initial understanding, preparation and empathy, basically.
Okay, so after discover, the next aspect is manipulate. Now, that word can sound a bit tricky.
It can, yeah. And Sun knows that. He's quick to clarify. He doesn't mean it in a negative, deceptive way, not like dark psychology or anything.
Right, so what does he mean by it?
He defines it more like twisting the fact in your favor, positively. It's about being deliberate, planning your communication so it actually works for you, to help you reach your goal.
So it's about being strategic with how you frame things.
Pretty much. Being intentional. He gives examples like maybe using a bit of self-deprecation if your audience seems skeptical. Try to lower their guard.
Or maybe taking a more emotional approach if they seem driven by feelings.
Exactly. Or if they're all about logic, you bring the data, the evidence. The core idea for Suin is making sure every single piece of your communication is pulling in the right direction, towards your objective, proactively.
Like being the architect of the conversation, making sure all the pieces fit together to guide things. Okay, that makes sense. And the third aspect,
That's influence. And Suin sees this as the ultimate goal.
to influence people, hopefully positively.
Ideally, yes. And he says this influence comes from your power, but not necessarily power like authority or rank.
More like your personal strengths.
Yeah, what you bring to the table could be your knowledge, your logic, maybe just your personality or your sense of humor even.
Things people respond well to in you.
Right. He says you need to know what is it that people like you for. Identify those strengths. Then, once you've done the discover and manipulate parts, understanding the audience, shaping the message, you leverage those personal strengths to actually make an impact.
Okay, so let's quickly recap Suin's framework there.
Yeah.
First, discover. Really know your audience and situation.
Check.
Second, manipulate, in his
Yeah.
positive sense. Strategically plan your communication.
Got it.
Third, influence. Use your unique strengths to connect and persuade. It's like a sequence.
Exactly. Each step builds on the previous one.
All right, so that covers the what's, the core psychological aspects.
Yeah.
But Suin also talks about the how, making this interesting distinction between the science and the art of communication.
Yes, he does. The science, according to Suin, is kind of the how it works, the strategies, the principles, understanding the psychology of how messages land.
The mechanics.
Right, the foundational knowledge.
Mm.
But the art, that's about how beautifully you make it work, how skillfully you apply those principles.
It's the delivery, the timing.
The emotional intelligence, yeah,
Yeah.
all that nuance. He uses this analogy of a magician.
Oh, yeah, I don't like that one.
The magician knows the science, right? The tricks, the mechanics, but it's the artistry, the showmanship, the way they engage you that makes the magic feel real. Overwhelming, even.
So in saying you need the science first, you need to understand these psychological bits we've discussed.
That's the starting point. Then you can develop your own art.
That makes a lot of sense. You need the foundation before you can build something impressive on top. Okay, now, speaking of foundations, Sun challenges a big one. Content is king.
Yes, he does. Bold statement. He says, content is not king.
Which definitely goes against the grain for a lot of people. So if content isn't king in his view, what is?
For Sun, conversation is the key, how you converse your content. His argument is that even the most amazing information
Brilliant content.
can just fall flat if it's not delivered engagingly. If it doesn't connect, it doesn't feel like a conversation somehow.
So it's less about just dumping information and more about creating that feeling of exchange, even with a big audience.
Exactly, making it feel interactive, even if it's mostly one way. Which brings us neatly to his 3-step process for actually doing this effectively. Attention, inspiration, and action.
Okay, let's break those down. Attention first.
Sun is crystal clear on this. You have to grab their attention right at the start, before anything else.
No attention, no communication.
Pretty much. And he's quite open about how you do it. Says, any way that works, find what feels right for you.
Could be a surprise, a question, a story.
A striking statistic, maybe even just using silence effectively, whatever hooks them. Because if you don't get them early...
Or message is lost. Doesn't matter how good it is later. He shares that intense example from his mentor.
Yeah.
Right, about the clock.
Yeah, the one about asking people to look at a clock and then hitting them with a statistic about suicides. It's stark, but it definitely illustrates grabbing attention powerfully.
Definitely memorable.
Hmm.
Okay, so you've got their attention. What's next?
Inspiration. Step 2. Once they're paying attention, you need to give them a reason to keep paying attention, to actually care.
Answer the what's in it for me question.
Exactly that. You need to show them why this matters to them. How is it relevant to their lives, their problems, their goals?
Because even a great hook wears off if there's no substance or relevance following it.
Right. You'll lose them just as quickly if they don't see the value. So inspiration here means making them care, forging that connection.
Makes sense?
Yeah.
Attention, then inspiration. And the third step.
Action. Sun believes that to make the learning, the impact, really stick,
Yeah.
you need to get the audience to do something.
Do something. How does that work?
He links it to how we perceive reality. You know, imagination sparks emotion, which then creates a physical sensation. Action helps ground the message in reality. It makes it more tangible.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like making it experiential. He gave that example from a seminar.
Yeah, where the speaker just asked people to talk to a stranger for 30 seconds.
Seems simple.
Super simple. But that small action probably got people slightly uncomfortable, made them engage directly with the topic of communication in a real way, revealed something, perhaps.
So the advice is to choose actions that are easy to do, relevant, and fit the audience size.
Precisely. Don't ask a huge auditorium to all do something complex, but find something that moves them beyond just listening passively. That active part makes a big difference.
Okay, so that 3-step process. Attention first, grab them. Inspiration next, make them care. Then action, make them do something to lock it in.
That's Sun's core process for effective communication. Sequential, each part building on the last.
Got it. Now, beyond these core ideas, Sun also offered a couple of universal communication strategies, things you can use pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, 2 really practical ones. The first he called the hot water test.
A hot water test? What's that about?
It's an analogy, really. A way to test the waters, so to speak, when you need to introduce something potentially sensitive or controversial.
Ah, like you wouldn't jump straight into boiling water.
Exactly. You dip a toe in first. So with a tricky topic, you might gently bring up a related, less charged point first, or ask a broad question.
To kind of gauge the temperature of the room. See how people react before you dive deep.
That's the idea. Be observant, be ready to adapt based on their response. It's about navigating potentially difficult conversations more smoothly.
Okay, that's smart. And the second universal strategy.
This one's about focusing on the person versus position. Soon thinks we often make a mistake, especially in work or sales.
Focusing too much on someone's title, their job.
Yeah, their seniority, their position, and that can make us nervous, right? Which kills effective communication.
Definitely been there.
Suin's core belief here is simple but powerful. Deep down inside everyone, they're a person.
Just a person,
Hmm.
regardless of the title.
Right. He uses the example of meeting a CEO. Don't be intimidated by CEO. Remember, they're an individual. They have stresses, challenges, just like anyone else.
Probably appreciate being treated like a normal human being sometimes.
He even mentioned actors, how they often just want to be treated with normal respect, not constantly like they're on a pedestal. So the takeaway is connect with the person, not just the position.
It levels the playing field, humanizes the whole interaction. He guarantees that approach helps, especially in business.
He seemed very confident about that one. And his final strategy he called say to make say.
Say to make say. What's the logic there?
It's about shifting the goal. Effective communication isn't just about you talking, delivering your message. It's about encouraging the other person to talk.
To get them to open up.
Yes, because, as Soon points out, you learn far more from their response, from what they say, than you do just by talking at them.
So it's about turning a monologue into a dialogue, asking good questions, listening.
Exactly. You make them feel heard, valued, and you get incredibly useful information back. Win-win.
Okay, those are three really practical strategies. Hot water test, person versus position, say useful tools.
Definitely. And then Soon kind of wraps everything up with one final, quite profound thought. It ties it all together.
What's that?
It's about belief. He says it's not just about how much you learn about communication. It's about how much you actually believe in what you learn.
Belief. How does that apply?
He gives the example of honesty. Everyone knows honesty is generally good, right?
Yep.
But do we always practice it? Maybe not. Soon suggests it's often because we don't have a deep core belief in its power, its long-term effectiveness.
So knowing isn't the same as truly believing and acting on it.
Precisely. He contrasts that with really influential people. They often take common sense principles, things everyone knows, but they act on them with such strong conviction, such belief.
And that's what gives them impact.
That's his point.
Yeah.
So his final nudge to you, the listener, is don't just understand these ideas intellectually. Really try to internalize them, believe in them, and then go out and confidently use them.
That's a powerful closing thought. It's not just tactics, it's about conviction. Okay, so let's quickly pull the threads together from this deep dive into Suin's psychology of communication.
We covered his three core aspects. Discover your audience and situation, manipulate your message strategically in that positive sense, and then influence using your strengths.
Right. Then the science versus the art, understanding the how before mastering the how beautifully.
And his challenge to content is king, arguing that conversation, the way you converse, is the real key.
Followed by that practical three-step process: grab attention, provide inspiration, and encourage action.
Well, finally, those useful universal strategies. The hot water test for tricky topics, focusing on the person, not the position, and say to foster dialogue.
It really paints a picture of communication as much more than just talking. It's understanding psychology, it's strategy, it's connection.
Absolutely. It's a blend of science and art aimed at creating real impact.
So here's something to chew on. Think about your next significant conversation. Maybe a meeting, maybe just a chat with someone important. Which one of Suin's principles could you consciously try to apply?
Or look back at a conversation that maybe didn't go so well. Could applying one of these ideas, maybe focusing more on the person or assessing the waters first, have changed things?
And maybe reflect on that idea of belief. How much do you truly believe in the power of good communication principles versus just knowing them? Could strengthening that belief actually make you a more effective communicator?
Lots to think about. Hopefully, this deep dive has given you some valuable shortcuts and fresh perspectives on making your own communication more impactful.